Lars Varel leaned back in the cockpit seat of his cargo hauler, watching streaks of starlight blur through the thick panoramic window. It was just another run platinum ore from the mining outpost on Lachesis 7, headed for the refineries orbiting Europa. The job wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't lucrative, but it kept his ship fueled and his pantry stocked. He liked the solitude of space. No boss breathing down his neck, no co-workers droning on about trivialities. Just the gentle hum of the engines and the vast, unchanging void. That peace was interrupted by the sudden buzz of a proximity alarm. Lars frowned, tapping a few controls on his console. Unscheduled debris, he muttered to himself. He squinted at the scanner, where a blip had appeared. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small shuttle, and it wasn't moving, at least, not much. He punched the comms button. "Jeff, you seeing this?" A voice crackled back, deep and gravelly. "Yeah, I've got it. Looks like it's tumbling slow. Could be a wreck." Jeffrey Alden had been Lars's only crewmate for the past 6 months. They weren't exactly close, but the man was reliable in a pinch and knew his way around a repair kit. He'd signed on after his own transport business had gone under, and though he could be a bit gruff, Lars appreciated having someone who could help keep the ship running. "We should check it out," Jeff said after a moment. "Could be salvage. Or it could be pirates," Lars countered. "Pirates don't just sit still. They set traps. This thing's just floating." Lars drummed his fingers on the armrest. He wasn't one to turn down a potential payday, and with the ore shipment already locked in, they had time to make a quick detour. He nudged the thrusters, bringing the hauler in closer. "All right," Lars said. "Let's take a look." The ship loomed larger as they approached, and it quickly became clear this wasn't human-made. The hull was too smooth, the lines too organic, like it had been grown rather than constructed. Lars had seen plenty of alien vessels in newsfeeds and documentaries, but never this close. His breath caught as they drifted within a few hundred meters. "Well, that's not Earth tech," Jeff remarked. "You think?" Lars said, eyes wide. "What do we even do if we find someone on board?" "Same thing we'd do if it were human," Jeff replied. "Offer assistance, if they're alive. If not, we take what we can and report it." The docking process was slow and careful. The alien ship was battered, a few gaping holes in the hull exposing dark, unlit corridors within. Lars guided their hauler into position, locking the airlocks together. Jeff stood behind him, strapping on his EVA harness. "Think they're still breathing in there?" Jeff asked. Lars shrugged. "We're about to find out." They stepped through the connecting tunnel into the alien craft. It was eerily silent, save for the faint creaks of stressed metal. The walls glowed faintly, a pulsing blue light that seemed to follow them. "I've got a bad feeling about this," Lars muttered, scanning the dimly lit hallway ahead. Jeff snorted. "You've got a bad feeling about everything." They moved cautiously, flashlights sweeping through the dark. The interior was unlike any human vessel Lars had ever seen. The floor was soft underfoot, like a dense, rubbery foam. The walls shimmered with an almost iridescent quality, shifting as they passed. "Let's split up," Jeff suggested. "We'll cover more ground." "Split up? In a place like this?" Lars frowned. "No way. We stick together." Jeff rolled his eyes but didn't argue. They kept moving, passing through what looked like storage compartments and a strange, garden-like chamber filled with bioluminescent plants. After what felt like hours, they came to a central chamber. A large, dome-shaped room with a high ceiling that glowed faintly. In the center was a figure, a humanoid form, slumped against a console. "Holy shit," Jeff whispered. Lars stepped forward cautiously, his light sweeping over the figure. It was clearly not human. The being's skin shimmered with a pale, iridescent glow, and its limbs were longer and more slender than a person's. Despite its alien appearance, there was something unmistakably fragile about the way it was curled up, as if it had been trying to shield itself. "Is it alive?" Jeff asked. Lars knelt down, checking for signs of life. The alien's chest moved faintly, rising and falling in shallow breaths. Yeah, Lars said. Barely. Jeff shifted nervously. You really think we should help it? I mean, what if it's dangerous? It's injured, Lars said firmly. And it's alone. What would you want someone to do if it were you lying here? Jeff sighed. All right, fine. But you're the one carrying it back to the ship. With great care, Lars lifted the alien. It was lighter than he expected, and its skin felt cool to the touch. He could see delicate patterns across its surface, almost like veins of opal. As they made their way back to the airlock, Lars couldn't help but wonder what kind of being he was holding. Who were they? Why had their ship ended up here, adrift and broken? Back on board their hauler, Lars and Jeff set up a makeshift med bay in the small cargo bay. They didn't have much basic first aid supplies, a portable oxygen unit, and a scanner that barely understood human anatomy, let alone alien. Still, they did their best. As Lars monitored the alien's breathing, Jeff paced the room. You know this is going to complicate things, right? What if it wakes up and tries to kill us? Then we'll deal with it, Lars said. But for now, we focus on keeping them alive. You're way too optimistic for your own good, Jeff muttered. And you're way too cynical, Lars shot back, though his tone was light. Hours passed, and the alien showed small signs of recovery. It moved slightly, its fingers twitching. Lars stayed by its side, watching, waiting. Jeff eventually relented and brought over some rations, though neither of them ate much. When the alien finally opened its eyes, it blinked slowly, adjusting to the dim light. Those violet orbs fixed on Lars, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Lars felt a strange sense of connection, as if the alien could see straight through him. Jeff broke the silence. What do we do now? We introduce ourselves, Lars said. To an alien? That doesn't even speak our language? Lars shrugged. Better to try than not. He reached out a hand slowly, keeping his movements calm. Lars, he said, tapping his chest. Lars Varel. The alien tilted its head, a faint sound escaping its lips. It was musical, almost like a hum. Then it lifted a hand to its own chest, mimicking the gesture. A soft voice, quiet but clear, followed. Aurixa. Lars smiled, and for the first time since they'd boarded the derelict ship, he felt a flicker of hope. They weren't just dealing with a strange life form anymore, they were meeting someone. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to help each other. Back on the hauler, things were anything but easy. With Aurixa stabilized, Lars and Jeff set about the task of learning to communicate. It turned out that saving someone from the brink of death was the simple part. The hard part was figuring out what to do next. So, Jeff said, pacing in front of the console, we've got a living, breathing alien. Now what? Lars tapped his knuckles on the edge of the table. We figure out where she's from. Maybe she's got a home planet nearby, or a colony that can take her back. Jeff raised an eyebrow. How exactly do you plan to ask? We don't even know if she understands what we're saying. Lars glanced toward Aurixa, who was sitting on one of the makeshift medbay's low cots. She watched them closely, her bright violet eyes tracking their every movement. Though she didn't speak their language, she seemed keenly aware of the tension in the room. Well, Lars said, we start simple. Pointing, gestures, basic stuff. Jeff crossed his arms. This is gonna be a long haul. They started by naming objects. Lars held up a ration pack. Food, he said clearly. Aurixa tilted her head, her shimmering skin reflecting the dim light. After a pause, she made a soft sound, somewhere between a hum and a chirp. It wasn't an exact replication of the word, but it was close enough to show she was trying. That's it, Lars encouraged, nodding. Food. He pointed to himself. Lars. Then to Jeff. Jeff. Aurixa watched them both, her thin fingers resting on the cot's edge. She pointed at Lars and echoed his name, then did the same with Jeff. Well, look at that, Jeff said, leaning on the wall. She's got a good ear for this stuff. Lars grinned. Told you it would work. For hours, they repeated words, pointing at objects and making gestures. Orks's voice grew stronger as she practiced, her sounds evolving into something close to human speech. She mimicked their motions, her own hands forming shapes and signals that Lars and Jeff did their best to decipher. Water, Lars said, holding up a container and taking a sip. He offered it to Orks, who hesitated before mimicking his action. Her expression shifted, her mouth quirking slightly upward, an alien version of a smile, perhaps. See that? Jeff said, nudging Lars. She's catching on. Looks like you've got a knack for teaching. It's not just me, Lars replied. She's sharp. And she wants to understand. Over the next few days, their makeshift language grew. Orks started stringing together simple phrases, mixing her own alien tones with the words Lars and Jeff taught her. When they asked about her ship, she pointed to the viewport, then traced shapes in the air, stars, planets, and what appeared to be a series of lines forming a route. I think she's showing us her star system, Lars said. Jeff squinted at the patterns. Or maybe she's telling us to turn left at the next asteroid field. Very funny, Lars said, but he couldn't help smirking. Let's try to match these to a chart. Maybe we can find her home. They spent hours at the navigation console, comparing Orks's gestures to known star maps. Jeff handled the technical side, pulling up different sections of the galaxy and adjusting coordinates, while Lars kept Orks involved, asking questions and encouraging her to clarify with gestures and sounds. This one? Lars asked, pointing to a cluster of stars on the screen. Orks studied it intently, then shook her head. She made a circular motion with her hand, then pointed at a different part of the chart. Jeff keyed in the new coordinates, and a new section of space appeared on the display. That's more like it, Lars said, glancing at her. We're getting closer. She gave a series of chirps that Lars took to mean yes, her hand resting lightly on the console as if trying to guide them herself. By the end of the day, they had a potential location, a small, uncharted star system that matched Orks's gestures. Jeff leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Well, he said, we've got a destination. Question is, do we just drop her off there and hope for the best? Lars frowned. No. If that system is where she's from, we make sure she gets to her people. We don't just leave her stranded again. Right, Jeff said with a sigh. Because this whole thing hasn't been complicated enough. In the quiet moments, when the engines hummed softly in the background and the stars drifted by the viewport, Lars and Orks began to understand each other in ways that didn't require words. She would sit with him in the cockpit, her presence a comforting constant. Sometimes, she would mimic the way he leaned back in the chair, a small smile playing on her lips. Other times, she would point out stars she recognized, making soft sounds that Lars interpreted as memories, stories she couldn't yet explain in their shared language. One night, while Jeff was asleep, Lars found himself showing her a collection of old Earth music. He played a soft, melodic tune from the 20th century, something calming and familiar. Orks listened intently, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She leaned closer, her expression a mix of curiosity and wonder. Music, Lars said, tapping the console. It's called music. Orks repeated the word, her voice almost blending with the notes. She tilted her head, then reached out and lightly touched his arm, a gesture she'd begun using when she wanted to express approval or gratitude. Lars smiled, leaning back in his chair. Guess you like it, huh? She nodded, her soft hums blending with the melody. It was a quiet moment, but it meant more than any words they'd exchanged so far. In that instant, Lars realized they were no longer just two beings trying to survive in the void. They were becoming something more, partners, perhaps even friends. In the weeks that followed, their connection deepened. Orks learned to say their names with more confidence, her voice no longer hesitant. She helped them repair small systems on the ship, using her slim fingers and intuitive understanding of technology to patch circuits and stabilize power conduits. You know, Jeff said one day as he and Lars worked on a stubborn air filtration unit, she's pulling her weight around here. Maybe we should hire her full-time. Lars chuckled. I don't think she needs the money, Jeff. Well, if we ever get her home, she can tell her people how we humans know a thing or two about teamwork. Lars glanced over at Orixa, who was carefully adjusting a panel near the reactor. She looked up and gave him a small nod, as if she understood exactly what he and Jeff had been talking about. I think she already knows, Lars said softly. Jeff sighed and leaned against the bulkhead, watching Lars with a raised eyebrow. You know, you're spending more time with her than you do with your own navigation charts. Just saying. Jeff, she's the one who helped us figure out the star system, Lars shot back. She's been more useful than you. Jeff held up his hands. Hey, no offense. I'm just wondering if you're planning to adopt her or something. Lars rolled his eyes. She's not a stray cat. She's a sentient being, and she's helping us. He paused, his tone softening. And she's good company. Good company, huh? Jeff smirked. Well, as long as she doesn't take my bunk, we're fine. The truth was, Lars had come to look forward to the quiet moments he spent with Orixa. They worked together on small tasks, from recalibrating the ship's sensors to cleaning up the galley. She learned quickly, her long, slender fingers deftly handling tools she had never seen before. Jeff grumbled about it, but Lars could tell that even he was impressed by her knack for problem-solving. Pass me the spanner, Lars said one evening, peering into a panel under the console. Orixa tilted her head, then handed him the correct tool. This, she asked, her voice still carrying that melodic tone but now more confident in her chosen words. Exactly, Lars said, grinning. See, Jeff? She's learning. Jeff, seated at the other side of the cockpit, just shrugged. You're turning her into a damn mechanic. She'll have us out of a job by the time we reach that star system. Orixa didn't seem to understand the joke, but she smiled slightly, her violet eyes glinting in the soft light of the cockpit. Lars chuckled and continued tightening the loose connection. When the panel was secure, Orixa placed a hand on Lars's arm. Lars, she said softly. Thank you. He turned toward her, surprised by the sudden sincerity in her tone. Thank me? For what? She gestured to the ship around them, then pointed at herself. Safe. You make safe. Lars's chest tightened. He hadn't expected that kind of gratitude, and it caught him off guard. You're welcome, he managed to say. We couldn't just leave you out there. Jeff, ever the skeptic, piped up. Yeah, don't mention it. All in a day's work for us heroic cargo haulers. Orixa looked at him, then at Lars, her brow furrowing as if she were trying to piece together what Jeff meant. She mimicked the word, her accent lilting. Hero? Lars groaned. Thanks, Jeff. Now she thinks we're heroes. Jeff grinned. Hey, if the shoe fits. But the light-hearted moment didn't linger. That evening, as they all sat in the cramped galley, Orixa seemed distant, her gaze fixed on a patch of stars visible through the viewport. Lars noticed her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the faint shimmering patterns on her skin shifting like ripples in water. Something on your mind? Lars asked. Orixa hesitated, then pointed out the window. Home. Far. Very far. Lars leaned back in his seat, trying to imagine what it must be like. Being the only survivor, stranded on an alien ship, unsure if she'd ever see her own kind again. He glanced at Jeff, who, for once, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. We'll get you there, Lars said. We'll make it. Orixa turned her violet eyes on him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. I trust. Those two words hung in the air. Lars couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility, one he hadn't anticipated when they first pulled her from the wreckage. She trusted him, and he'd be damned if he let her down. Later that night, as Lars was doing a routine check of the ship's systems, he heard a faint sound behind him. He turned to see Orixa standing there, her hands clasped in front of her. Lars, she said softly. Something wrong? He asked, wiping his hands on a rag. She stepped closer, her movements deliberate but unthreatening. No. Not wrong. Thank you. Lars tilted his head. You already said that. She shook her head. Different. I feel, she trailed off, searching for the right word. Finally, she placed a hand over her chest. Warm. Warm. Lars didn't know what to say. Arixa had a way of cutting through the noise, of simplifying things he often overthought. He smiled awkwardly, not sure how to respond. Well, you're welcome. Her fingers brushed his sleeve, a brief but unmistakable touch. Lars felt a strange, almost electric sensation, subtle, but there. Arixa pulled her hand back, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before she nodded and left. When Lars mentioned the interaction to Jeff the next day, his crewmate raised an eyebrow. She touched your arm and said warm? What does that even mean? Lars shrugged. I don't know. Maybe she's just grateful. Jeff snorted. You sure she's not flirting? Lars nearly dropped the tool he was holding. What? No. She's not, she wouldn't, she's not even human, Jeff. Hey, I'm just saying, Jeff said, holding up his hands. Aliens have feelings too, don't they? I mean, maybe that's how they show affection or something. Lars opened his mouth to argue but found he had no words. The truth was, he had no idea what Arixa's culture considered normal, let alone what her gestures meant. Maybe it was a sign of gratitude. Maybe it was something else. Whatever it was, it left Lars thinking. Over the next few days, the interactions between Lars and Arixa became more frequent. She sought him out during quiet hours, asking questions in her careful, broken English. Sometimes she would simply sit near him, observing as he worked. Other times, she would help, her movements careful and precise. She likes you, Jeff remarked one day, watching them from across the room. Lars shot him a glare. She's just being friendly. We're the only ones here. Yeah, Jeff said, smirking, but she's not following me. She was there, tracing routes with her elegant hands and nodding thoughtfully. Even during meals, she sat with him, sometimes humming softly to herself in a tone that Lars found strangely soothing. One evening, after a long day of work, Lars sat down in the cockpit to review their course. Arixa appeared at his side, as she often did. She leaned over the console, her gaze fixed on the star map. For a moment, Lars didn't say anything. He simply watched her, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Lars, she said after a long silence. We, together. Yes? Lars blinked, caught off guard by the directness of her question. Yeah. I mean, we're a crew. We work together. Arixa turned her eyes on him, her expression serious. Not crew. More. More? Lars echoed. She nodded, her hand brushing his arm again. More than crew. Lars didn't know how to respond. He felt that same faint spark, the subtle charge that always accompanied her touch. He wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, or if there was something about her that reached beyond physical differences. All he knew was that when she looked at him like that, the vast expanse of space felt a little less empty. Lars had never imagined the ship could get any colder. The environmental systems were failing piece by piece, and with no spare parts on hand, all they could do was patch things together as best they could and hope it held. But now, the freezing temperatures were a constant presence, turning every breath into a visible puff of vapor. We need to figure something out, Jeff said, rubbing his hands together in the cockpit. His normally gruff tone carried a hint of real concern. The heating coils are barely holding. I give it another day before we're popsicles. Lars nodded, his arms crossed. He'd wrapped himself in an extra thermal blanket, but the chill still crept through. I'm working on it. The power relay for the coils isn't getting full current. Maybe if we bypass the main conduit and... Already tried that, Jeff cut him off. It worked for about an hour. Then the whole system went haywire. Then we reroute, Lars said. We don't have a choice. Jeff grunted and pushed away from the console. Fine. But if this doesn't work, we're gonna need to start thinking about backup plans. Lars didn't respond, instead turning back to the schematics on his datapad. They had a short window to get this fixed before the ship became uninhabitable. Orixa had been quietly listening from the corner of the cockpit. Her violet eyes shifted between the two men, her expression hard to read. "Lars," she said softly, and he glanced over. "I help." Lars paused. "Help how?" Orixa stepped forward, her hands clasped together. "I know, circuitry. Different, but same. I help fix." Jeff snorted. "Great. Now we're taking engineering tips from the alien." "Enough, Jeff," Lars said sharply. "If she thinks she can help, let's see what she's got." Jeff muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. Orixa approached the console, studying the diagram on Lars's screen. She traced one of the pathways with her finger, her movements deliberate. "This," she said, pointing at a secondary node. "Bypass here. More stable." Lars furrowed his brow. "You think we should reroute through the tertiary conduit?" She nodded. "Yes. Current steady. No overload." Jeff raised an eyebrow. "You understood any of that?" Lars ignored him and focused on Orixa. "You're sure about this?" She nodded again, more firmly this time. "Sure." "All right," Lars said, pulling out his toolkit. "Jeff, get me the junction spanner." "Orixa, show me exactly where we need to make the cut." Jeff grumbled but handed over the tool. Orixa crouched down beside Lars, pointing to a section of the exposed panel. "Here," she said, tapping the junction. "Then here." Lars carefully followed her guidance, cutting into the conduit and connecting a bypass line. The ship's hum changed pitch slightly as the power flow adjusted. He glanced at Orixa, who watched him intently. "Is it supposed to do that?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Stabilizing." A few tense moments passed. The air still felt icy, but Lars noticed that the small frost patches that had formed on the control panels were beginning to melt. He adjusted a few more settings, and the hum smoothed out further. "It's working," Lars said. "Jeff, check the temp gauge." Jeff leaned over the readout, his expression skeptical. Then he blinked. "Damn. It's actually going up. Slowly, but it's going up." Lars let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good. That buys us time." Orixa's lips curved into a small smile. "We fix." Lars returned the smile. "Yeah, we did." Jeff groaned. "Great, now she's part of the engineering team." "I think she just saved our asses," Lars said, standing up and stretching. "Give her some credit." Orixa tilted her head, clearly not understanding the phrase, but her tone was warm. Happy help." "Not bad," Jeff admitted reluctantly. "Still not sure I trust her entirely, but not bad." They spent the next few hours monitoring the system, making sure the fix held. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was enough to keep them from freezing to death. Lars found himself working more closely with Orixa, her quick thinking and calm demeanor proving invaluable. "Where'd you learn all that?" Lars asked as they sat side by side, reviewing the conduit schematics. Orixa hesitated, then said slowly, "Before this ship. I engineer. My people. Design systems. Power." Lars nodded. "Makes sense. You're good at it." Her smile widened. "Thank you." Jeff, from across the room, rolled his eyes. "You two want a moment alone?" Lars shot him a glare. "Don't you have something useful to do?" Jeff snorted and left the room, muttering about checking the ship's exterior seals. Orixa glanced at Lars, her expression curious. "Jeff, angry?" "No, not really," Lars said. "He's just grumpy. That's how he is." "Grumpy?" Orixa repeated, testing the word. "Grumpy. Like, not happy?" "Exactly." Why grumpy? Lars chuckled. It's just his personality. Don't take it personally. Orixa nodded, though she still seemed to be pondering it. They sat quietly for a moment, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound. Lars found the silence comfortable, and when he glanced over, he realized Orixa had been watching him. What? He asked, raising an eyebrow. You, kind, she said. Kind to me. Well, I couldn't just leave you out there, Lars replied. It wouldn't have been right. Orixa reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. It was a light, fleeting touch, but it carried a weight that made Lars pause. He looked at her, unsure of what to say. Grateful, she said softly. Lars smiled faintly. You've said that before. I get it. And you've been helping out a lot. We wouldn't have gotten this far without you. She tilted her head slightly, her violet eyes studying him. I want help more. Lars chuckled. We could definitely use the help. Just don't let Jeff hear you say that. He'll make you fix everything. Orixa laughed, a soft, musical sound that was quickly becoming familiar to Lars. It made the ship feel less cold, less empty. In that moment, surrounded by the whirring machinery and the faint hum of stabilized power, Lars felt something shift. A connection, subtle but undeniable. They were no longer just two strangers on a ship, they were becoming a team. He leaned back in his chair, glancing at Orixa one more time. We'll figure this out. Together. She nodded, her expression calm and steady. Together. Lars sat in the cockpit, staring at the readout on the navigation console. The route they'd charted was stable, the power systems were holding, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like they might actually make it. The distant star system that Orixa had pointed out was only a few jumps away now, the long days of frozen uncertainty finally giving way to a glimmer of stability. Think that's her home? Jeff asked, leaning against the console. He wasn't quite as grumpy now, though Lars suspected that was mostly because the heating systems were back to normal and the ship's interior no longer felt like a deep freeze. I mean, we're putting a lot of faith in some hand gestures and a few words. Orixa knows what she's doing, Lars said without looking up. She's been guiding us this whole time. Jeff scratched at his chin. Yeah, but what if we get there and it's just a bunch of empty rocks? Then what? Lars finally turned to face him. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, let's focus on making sure we arrive in one piece. Jeff raised his hands. All right. You're the captain. The sound of soft footsteps made Lars glance back toward the cockpit entrance. Orixa stood there, her slender frame silhouetted against the dim corridor lights. Her gaze shifted from Lars to Jeff and back again. Course, good, she asked, her voice carrying that melodic cadence that still caught Lars off guard sometimes. It's good, Lars said. We're on track. A few more jumps, and we'll be there. Orixa nodded, her expression calm. Then she hesitated, stepping closer. Talk you? Jeff looked from Orixa to Lars, then grinned. I'll leave you two to it. I've got, something to check in the engine room. Sure you do, Lars muttered. Jeff chuckled and disappeared down the corridor, leaving them alone. Lars turned his attention back to Orixa. What's on your mind? Orixa approached the console, resting her hands lightly on the edge. I want to say thank you. You, not have to help. But you, did. We couldn't just leave you out there, Lars replied. It wouldn't have been right. She tilted her head slightly, her violet eyes meeting his. Many would leave. Many not care. You, different. Lars wasn't sure what to say to that. Instead, he gestured to the co-pilot's chair. You want to sit? Orixa hesitated, then nodded. She lowered herself into the seat, her movements deliberate. For a moment, they sat in silence, the quiet hum of the engines filling the space between them. You trust me? She asked, breaking the quiet. Of course, Lars said, surprised by the question. You've done nothing but help since you got here. You've proven you know what you're doing. She looked down at her hands, tracing patterns on the console's edge. I worry. You think me danger? Lars frowned. Why would I think that? She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes. I, alien. Not human. You, not fear? Lars leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. We're all just people out here, trying to survive. You've given me no reason to fear you. So no, I don't think you're a danger. Her expression softened, and she offered a small, tentative smile. I, grateful. You, good. Lars chuckled. I'm just trying to do the right thing. Orixa reached out, her hand hovering near his arm before settling lightly on his sleeve. Right thing, not easy. You make easy. Her touch was light, her fingers cool against the fabric of his shirt. Lars glanced at her hand, then back at her. There was a quiet sincerity in her expression, a warmth that contrasted with her initial, guarded demeanor. He didn't pull away. Instead, he placed his hand over hers, giving it a small, reassuring squeeze. I'm glad I could help, he said simply. For the next few hours, they worked together in the cockpit, refining the final approach and double-checking the ship's systems. Jeff eventually returned, grumbling something about how it was a two-person crew, not a one-person plus an alien operation. But even his usual sarcasm had softened somewhat. He no longer avoided Orix's presence, and though he rarely spoke to her directly, he acknowledged her contributions with a grudging nod. As they prepared for the last jump, Orixa leaned closer to Lars, studying the star map on the console. She pointed to the system they'd been heading toward, her finger tracing the path. Home, soon? Very soon, Lars confirmed. Just one more jump. She nodded, then hesitated. After you leave? Lars blinked. What do you mean? She tapped her chest, then gestured to the console. You, go. I, stay. Lars frowned. He hadn't thought about that. He'd been so focused on getting her home, he hadn't considered what would happen afterward. The idea of leaving her there alone again made something in his chest tighten. We'll figure that out when we get there, he said finally. She looked at him, her violet eyes searching his. You, stay? Lars hesitated. I don't know yet. But I won't leave you stranded. Orixa smiled faintly, as if his answer had been enough for now. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting back to the star map. Jump in 3 minutes, Jeff announced from the engineering console. Buckle up. Lars turned back to the controls, his hands moving over the switches and dials. Orixa, you ready? She nodded, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Ready. The ship shuddered as the jump drive engaged, the stars outside stretching into streaks of light before disappearing entirely. Lars focused on the readouts, ensuring everything remained stable during the transit. When the ship dropped back into normal space, the distant star system was there, a faint cluster of lights on the edge of the screen. There it is, Lars said, leaning forward. We made it. Orixa's eyes lit up, her hand tightening slightly on his sleeve. Home. Jeff scanned the readings. No immediate signs of trouble. Looks like a quiet system. Lars nodded, his gaze fixed on the display. Let's take it slow. Approach carefully. As they moved closer, the details of the system became clearer. Planets, moons, and a faint orbital station came into view. Orixa pointed excitedly, her voice quick and melodic. There. Station, my people. Jeff leaned in. Well, I'll be damned. She actually led us to something. Lars smiled. Told you she knew what she was doing. They maneuvered toward the station, sending out a basic signal to announce their arrival. After a tense moment, a reply came through, an alien voice speaking in a language none of them understood. But Orixa responded, her tone confident and familiar. She spoke quickly, her words flowing in a way that reminded Lars just how much she'd been holding back while communicating in their broken English. When the conversation ended, Orixa turned to Lars. They Welcome. We, docking. Good, Lars said. Let's bring her in. Jeff handled the controls, guiding the hauler into one of the station's docking bays. When the ship settled into place, Arixa stood, her movements suddenly energized. She looked at Lars, her expression bright. Thank you. You help more than words. Lars stood too, giving her a small smile. It's been a long journey, but we made it. Arixa reached out, resting her hand on his shoulder. You, friend. He chuckled. Yeah. I guess we are. Jeff rolled his eyes but said nothing. As the airlock cycled open, Arixa stepped through first, her posture straight, her head held high. Her people were waiting, and though Lars didn't know what would come next, he knew they had accomplished something remarkable together.